Welcome to today's programming tutorial. In today's tutorial, we're going to look at simple validation routines and maintainability. Nothing new here. So simple validation routines is quite an important skill. If we take in some sort of input, for example, we enter a password. Let's just specify our password here. We'll do QWERTY 1234. I might want to build a system that checks the data that the user has entered. In this case, it's the password, but it could be anything. So what kind of checks can we perform here? Well, let's start with a very simple check. Is the string empty? Easy check to do. We're going to say, if the length of our password is equal to 0, then password is empty. Now, normally when you ask for user input, they get it wrong. You might want to keep asking them until they get the user input right. How can we do that if we're using an if statement here? Well, why don't we change the if statements to a while loop so that it always keeps asking them until password is no longer equal to 0. So there you've seen two ways of doing the same thing, either using an if statement just to check once, or using a while loop to check forever. Now, keep in mind, every time this happens, we're going to have to make sure that the user inputs something again. If not, we're going to get stuck in an infinite loop. So let's change this so that it's an input, enter password. And I'm going to copy this and paste it in here so that the while loop continuously asks the user. So if I enter an empty password, I get password is empty all the time until I type in something. And let's do a little success message outside of here, just to know we were successful. Now, the second type of check, and I'll keep using a while loop for now, but keep in mind you can use an if statement instead, is does the data reach a minimum or maximum length? Well, we could still use the len here, but instead of doing this, we can say, is it greater than or equal to, let's say, for example, 8? I'll do if password is too short. Now, this is the wrong condition to meet because this condition is saying while it's greater than or equal to 8, keep saying that the password is too short. Let's change this so it's less than. In other words, it's not inclusive of 8. Now, if I type in a password that's too short, it'll come out with an error. But if I type in a password that is longer than 8, I get success. The next validation routine, check to see, is the data between two values in length? Or, it could be that you want to check if a number is in between two numbers. In this case, we're going to stick with our password. So I want to check if the password is between, let's say, 8 and 12 characters, inclusive. That means including 8 and 12. Well, I could say if the length of the password is less than 8, because that's the failure condition, remember, or the length of the password is greater than 12. Again, this is the entire failure condition. If it's less than 8 or greater than 12, not inclusive, it's an error. Password must be between 8 and 12. So if I type in random thing over here, you can see here, I write a long one. I have to write a password that is in between 8 and 12 characters long. The last type of validation is what happens if the user enters illegal characters? Let's say we don't want the user to enter any numbers in their password. Well, let's create a whole program to check this. We're going to check the amount of letters that the user has. Let's do a boolean. We'll say that's true at the beginning. Or actually, rather, let's say that we're not sure if it has letters. I will do numbers, and let's change it to counts instead. Or actually, let's do letters exist and numbers exist. We don't care how many there are. And that equals false. So, what is our condition? While not letters exist, or not numbers exist. In other words, if either of these are false, we're going to keep asking them to enter a password. Now we don't have to ask them a password up here because these are automatically set to false, which means that this while loop is going to run anyway. So let's change this, make our program a little bit more efficient by just asking the password inside the loop. And at the beginning of the loop, we're also going to make both of them false. I'll explain this in a bit. Let's say we'll have to run through the password actually, because we want to get each individual character in the password. So we're going to do for character in password, and we're going to do something here. We're going to say if character is in the string A, B, C, D, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z, then we're going to say let's exist equals true. Now that's a bit of a problem, because what happens if our character is a capital letter? It won't work. It won't find the capital letter in here. Now I could convert all of these to capital letters, or let's just convert a character into a lowercase letter. See, we're using our past experience to help us solve this problem. Now let's also do another if statements. We're not going to link them up because they're two different if statements. If the character in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, then number exists equals true. Now we have a for loop here where it's both set to false, and if either of these conditions become true, it'll stop the loop from running. Now going back to why I did this over here, why do I set them false over here? Because if one of these is true, I want to make sure that when it goes back to the start of the loop, if this fails, in other words, if this condition continues because one of these is failing, I want the conditions to be reset back to their original values. So the user can't enter a password where the letters exist and then enter another password where the number exists. It has to be one password where both of these exist. I hope that makes sense. So if I run this program and I enter a password, let's say hello, I get enter password again because it's failed. If I enter 1, 2, 3, 4, I get another one because it's failed again. But if I enter a password that has both numbers and letters, it matches. Watch what happens if I don't do this, if I just leave it outside as false. If I enter a password like QWERTY, it fails, but if I enter a number, it passes. Now why is this? Because the first instance, I set this to true, and that means it's true again when I do this password. That's why I do this over here. These are 4 different types of validation routines. It's not the only validation routines that exist. You can do loads of other ones, like checking if something is a string, checking if something is a Boolean. There's absolutely a ton you can do. But you should understand how to do these 4 things with any type of data, whether it be a string, a number, or a list. Is the string empty? Is the data empty? Does the data reach a minimum or maximum length? Is the data in between 2 other numbers? And does the data contain illegal characters? Or does it contain, in this case, we did a program to check if it does contain characters. But I could very easily say, if numbers exist, and set it to true, set it's true here, and now I can sort of reverse it. There's a couple more things I need to do, but I can reverse it so that we check to see if numbers exist, and we basically saying that the password should contain numbers. Now, the other side to this is maintainability. How can we keep our code maintainable and readable so that, let's be honest, if you don't write documentation and in the future you forget about it, you are able to read your code and understand it? Let me give you an example. Let's change this code. I'll put LE for letter exists. I'll put NE for numbers exists. Let's do P for password and C for character, like that. In 5-6 months time, in 2-3 years time, in 5 years time, and let's say we just don't do an input over here at all, will you be able to understand what this code does quickly, or will it take you some time to work it out? This is an example of badly formatted code because it's not maintainable. It doesn't help future you work out what it does. Having names for all your variables, proper names for your variables, even if they're shorthands, for example, pass for password, helps you to maintain your code in the future. Likewise, comments are important. This program checks if your password contains letters and numbers. Then I can say here, for example, set both to false to reset the valid parameters. Here I can say only checking lowercase letters, and anything like that. Comments are really important. Even here I can say if letters exists equals false, or number exists equals false. If you don't understand it, for example, or you're not sure about it, comments are incredibly important to use in your program to make sure that future you understands what you're trying to do. But don't overcomplicate things. We don't want a comment for every single line in your program. That would be insane, because you'd end up having so many issues trying to edit code when you've got comments everywhere in your program. In fact, I rarely recommend that you use this inline commenting. I normally recommend that you do it above it, like that, because that makes this line very easy to edit while still maintaining a comment over here. I might even, in some cases, separate the comments like this, so they're easier to read. It could be that even when I'm doing something like this, or if I have subroutines like define convert letter, and by the way, you can use a pass keyword inside subroutines or if statements or for loops or while loops if you don't know what you want to put in there yet, but you don't want your program to stop running. It's like a placeholder. Let's do convert numbers, and let's do convert symbols. I could even use comments like this to separate my subroutines and make them easier for me to read. This is easier on my eyes to read than having it all bunched together. I can even close everything off like this and put them in their own little spaces like this to make it really easy for me to section off my different areas, whether it be subroutines or if statements or whatever. And when I want to edit it, I can just click on the arrow to see what's inside it. So keeping your code maintainable, understanding how to run simple validation routines is imperative to yourself as a programmer. Thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you found it helpful.